Here is an awesome interview with Karolina Pelc. She went through chaos and she found calm, which is the biggest takeaway that I took from this interview. And she founded BeyondPlay, which is a B2B gaming company. She raised 7 million euros. She then sold it after just 3 years to the biggest gaming company in the world in a DD process, which took just 2 months, which is pretty unheard of. She is intense, she's vulnerable, and she is resilient. And in this interview, we cover what type of hustle is necessary in the startup game, the dopamine addiction we can get from excessive doing, how to build powerful confidence and belief, what if I fly as opposed to what if I fail, what does being a good leader actually mean, the edges of deep transparency, control versus delegation, the chaos method, psychedelics, how she doesn't believe in luck, and how her self-published book is just like a startup. Please enjoy this epic conversation with the one and only Karolina Pelc. You have this knack of fitting things into a very short space of time and hitting it with a lot of intensity. This intensity is something that I felt in myself, and it can be exhausting. How have you found not letting it overcome you, and how do you maintain the energy levels that intensity requires?
I don't know if I can fully say that I haven't let it overcome me. There has been times where I definitely felt that it has overcome me, as a matter of fact. But I think intensity is something that has been with me all my life, throughout my whole journey, not just in a startup. I think in a startup, it became most prominent because the stakes were the highest. It was no longer employment and a job that I could quit when things got too serious. It was just this tunnel. At some point, I didn't see the light off at the end of it. But I've been intense forever. You're saying about 3 years journey in a startup. I've been working since I was 19, and I haven't really had a break since. My only break was my short maternity leave. And by no means that was a break. Let's be honest about that. So the 3 years of startup was just, I think, the highest stress level rather than highest intensity level, because I've always worked hard. Maybe the hours got longer here, but it was just this accountability that I felt internally, because I was responsible for the people, I was responsible for the paychecks, I was responsible for commitments we made, and that hits you different. And that's where you kind of know you can't give up. And even when you feel like I'm on the edge of burnout here, I'm putting myself in danger. This is not healthy. I don't know how long I can go on like this. You're still thinking, but what choice do I have? These people trusted me. These investors trusted me with their money. These customers trusted me with their deals. You don't really have any other choice that keep pushing until you're on the other side of the roller coaster and things ease out a little bit. The problem is that you don't know when they're going to ease out.
I find the body can go so much further than the mind can. It's often the mind that stops us.
Yeah.
And so then these artificial structures of responsibility and accountability to other people kind of pushes the mind that much further. But also we can get used to this level of stress. And you mentioned that you almost hit burnout, and something that most founders experience at some point in the journey, which is just not a sustainable way of doing things. Most companies take a lot longer to exit, and burnout can take you out of the game for months, if not even years.
Yes.
And so it just isn't in the interest of the company. And so how do you recognize where that tipping point is?
I was probably months away from burnout. It was to the point that I started to see a psychologist because I knew that something was not right. And he told me exactly what he just said. He said, you're not taking it seriously enough. I'm telling you, you're exhibiting all kinds of burnout that is going to happen to you very soon. And I don't think you understand what that's going to mean, because you think you're so tough. you think you've gone through tougher things and you think you are undestroyable. So when you think burnout, you think that you're going to get a little bit sad and a little bit anxious. And I'm telling you, you're not going to be able to get out of bed and do your job. And I didn't believe him. I started doing some things towards getting a little bit better. So I tried to put processes in place where I could delegate more. I started to trust people more, but it wasn't enough. So if the acquisition didn't happen at that time, which made me work even harder for some months, but it was a clear sort of goal post at the end, which was easier to commit yourself to. I don't know where I would be, a year from there, whether I would be able to run the company at that pace for another 5 years towards the long goal. So I was very fortunate that things happened when they happened. Did that teach me that I was doing things in an unsustainable way? Would I do them differently now? I'd love to say yes, but truthfully, probably I wouldn't, because I see it on the second project I threw myself in, which was supposed to be a lifestyle sideline project. Write a book, you go to a nice coffee shop, write a couple of chapters here and there, and it's just relaxing and a hobby type of exercise. And very quickly it became high stakes business for me, and back to 18-hour days and short timeline and a goal I couldn't move and commitments I've made. So that kind of shows me that maybe I'm just wired like that. And I thrive under pressure. And I need that intensity to feel fulfilled. I'm not saying that's good. And maybe this is something I should work on. But I can't say I'm working on it much just yet.
You mentioned before about this sort of dopamine addiction and the love of doing and achievement. And this is something that I'm facing in myself a lot now, where I'm exactly the same as you. I love the intensity. I love like the always on. A day full of meetings is my ideal day. And I've recently started going to a different type of therapist, a somatic therapist, who talks about stress in your body. And she has shared this same summary of like, if you burn out, then you could be out for 18 to 24 months.
Yeah.
And like, how helpful is that for the business, etc. She is uncovering deeper things around how I'm trying to prove my worth to my absent father. And that's like the sort of like striving to do and achieve and sort of prove my self-worth in a way. Have you had any sort of reflections as to where this addiction to doing in yourself comes from?
I don't like the word addiction. I do sometimes refer to it as such, but it's more sort of the internal need for dopamine, because you can't be addicted to something that is required by your body, because dopamine is a required feeling in us. It's a natural thing. It's just when we are over dependent on the high supply of it, when it's problematic, right? I do connect it very much to the upbringing, and not just in myself, but I think in our whole generation. Because at the beginning, I did try to maybe shift the blame a little bit on maybe my parents were a bit too strict on me. I come from a household of professional athletes where achievement was always valued. I was pushed on the athletic level, I was pushed on the academic level, and I was a high achiever from a very early age, until I rebelled and crashed and decided I want to achieve nothing in life for at least good few years of high school, which was a shock to my parents, by the way. But I did try to find blame in them for this. But when I revisited that whole situation and analyzed it sort of with a fresh mind, and also with the perspective of the success I achieved in life, and not just with the startup, but in general, I've been successful in pretty much every job that I held. I had never been let go, fired, demoted. On the contrary, I've changed jobs whenever I wanted to. I progressed faster than other people. I had achievement in every job that I was in that was visible and recognized. And I realized that that also comes from that upbringing. So maybe there is some level of negativity that comes with being brought up in a household where you constantly need to prove your value. But at the end of the day, the places where we end up in life, thanks to that upbringing, are they really so bad that you have to look at that with resentfulness? I don't think so. And for me, what happened was I was looking for reasons to be resentful, and instead I found reasons to be grateful. And I realized that the way my parents brought me up delivered more benefits for me in life than it did any harm. And the main thing is also that the way our generation was brought up was subconscious for our parents. There was no parental blogs, there was no knowledge about parenthood, of closeness and Montessori and Waldorf education and all these things. They didn't have nannies, they didn't have iPads at their disposal. So we were just there around them. We had to get on with life and fight for their attention with the right things. And I don't think there is much of their own fault, especially when you look at generational traits even further, how they were brought up, by parents who have seen war and who have seen scarcity. And, in my case, in the case of my family, things like labor camps, and later on for my parents, communism. So really, I think we would be super entitled and privileged to try to find reasons for being successful in our upbringing and hold on to the negativity of that. So I learned to be grateful. I see my parents as great role models. I think that a lot what I have in life is very much thanks to the way the values that they sort of bred into me when I was a child. Whether they did it knowingly or unknowingly, doesn't really matter.
I completely agree. I don't think it's useful for us to try and associate blame or resentment or adopt this victim mentality, but it's useful to be aware of the container we were brought up in and then make the decision as to whether that container serves us or not, and whether we want to pass on that same container to our children or not.
Yeah.
And so then I suppose the question is, what are we actually optimizing for? It's definitely not comfort. Is it even happiness? It's definitely not satisfaction, because success is driven by perpetual dissatisfaction. Fulfillment, you mentioned before, maybe that's the one. Yeah. And then what success isn't worth it? Where's the line?
Yeah, I think the interesting point in here is you mentioned is are we happy with that container, and do we want to carry on in this way? Because in my case, I already have a child whom I am now passing on certain behaviors to, and values and traits, right? And I still haven't decided of what's the right balance of giving him a slightly different upbringing. So maybe he is not striving for attention and achievement as much as I've learned to, at the same time keeping some level of resilience and drive in him. Because I think it's very easy to spoil the next generation of kids that are going to be 25, are going to be young adults who also will have to have careers, jobs, ways to provide. And they might have even harder time than we did, because some of their jobs are just not going to exist, with AI and technology advancements. So I haven't decided, and I'm struggling between that daily. I even had a conversation the other day with my best friend who has a teenage daughter whom she pushed to start her own business. And all of a sudden, this business started thriving, and she is making, at the age of 16, £2,000 a month from, vending machines at the gym. And we had a conversation about whether 16-year-old should be told that this is too much money and you can't be having this amount of disposable income at 16, or is that a limiting belief that we've been brainwashed into thinking, and we shouldn't pass it on to the younger generation? They should be brought up in believing that they deserve the abundance of money And if they are able to make this money, they are also able to spend this money. There is nothing wrong with that. So I think there is such a thin line between, what we want for our children, what we don't want from our own upbringing. And sometimes it's a level of intuition that you have to let into this process because none of us knows it all. And I don't think there is one parental book or coach that can tell you what's the right way because each circumstance is different. Every human is different. There's just too many variables at play for one fits all type of strategy or advice.
I love that last thing you said around leaning into our intuition, because this is something that I was called out on recently by a founder circle that I'm a part of. And I was talking about all of these frameworks for building companies and quoting Steve Jobs and quoting this founder that I interviewed and that founder. And then someone said, you're living your life based on someone else's frameworks. What are your frameworks? What are your ways of living that you've learnt? And I've been battling with this question so much around how much do we lean into and try and learn from other people's experiences versus just our own? And how do we tap into that intuition as someone like me who is very head oriented, very like conscious, rational driven? It feels like it's such a block in my potential that I'm not able to tap into this intuition quite as much. So how have you been able to tap into this sort of deeper internal wisdom?
I think I tap into my intuition a lot. And this has also been a transformation in the way I think or in the way I thought I think. Because as a teenager, I remember I was quite good at painting, and I won a couple of competitions at school and my parents sent me for professional painting lessons. But what it showed me at those lessons is that I was not able to paint abstract. I was only able to replicate, what I saw in front of me. And I was really, really good at that. I had attention to detail. I could pretty much, paint a professional painting of a flower base and a couple of fruit, the boring stuff. But when it came to imagining what I want to paint, I was getting stuck. And I remember this experience stayed with me for a really long time and introduced me to that self-limiting belief that I have no imagination. And it blocked me from creative things for majority of my life, because this is also why I never wrote the book before. I wanted to be a book author ever since I remember, ever since being a little girl. I wrote letters, diaries, later on blogs. I was always into writing, but I always thought I cannot write something creative. I can only sort of tell stories that already happened. So I waited until I had enough stories to tell, and yet I still didn't want to write a book because I didn't feel that people would want to hear those stories. Why is my story interesting? Where does it lead to? It doesn't have an exit. I'm still alive. I didn't die. I didn't have any major success at the pinnacle of all my stories. What's the catalyst for people wanting to pick up the book? So I needed the exit to happen, and only that made me believe all of a sudden of, okay, now I've got that hook that will make people pick up the book and tie those stories together to some extent. But even that belief of not being able to be creative was flawed this whole time, because I was a product person. I came up with tens of innovative features for companies I used to work for. And my startup was also a completely experimental, unproven product idea that no one has ever thought about before. But I only realize this now, that actually I am able to think creatively and I don't need other people's frameworks. And I've been leaning to my intuition in my career, in the startup, and in the book. Because when I first started the company, I thought that I'll read all the books, the Upwork, the Netflix book, the WeWork. I watched some series, and I thought I'll be able to apply the lessons learned and I'm going to nail it. Because I'm data-driven, I am learning from the pros, and I'm going to know how to do it all. And then I didn't have time to do any of that. So I had no choice but to lean into my intuition. But at the same time, I think it was the best course of action, because again, it's all so circumstantial. It's all so different for different team, for different founder, for different industry, for different stage of the company, that trying to apply the lessons from others, I think works only on mindset level. I don't think it works on use case level. So this is why now, where I try to pay it forward and share some of my advice, I focus mostly on mindset that I had, that it's much easier for other people to apply than practicalities of my startup. Of course, I can tell stories from our journey, because there was a lot of interesting things happening. But is it going to be very hard for people to replicate these circumstances in a first place and then the solution? Whereas on mindset, it's much easier for people to think, well, my situation is actually quite similar to her. What was she thinking in that situation? What kind of thinking helped her solve that problem? If you try to apply that, then the solution will be different, but it will be driven by the same way of thinking.
I've had this self-critical talk around how I've done 60-something interviews now. I've learnt so much practically from founders, but then I'm like, how much have I actually learnt, as opposed to being there in a completely unique context and having to make a decision. And making the decision fast and not hesitating is one of the predictors of startup success. And so
Absolutely.
I'm here questioning myself, but I love that point about how mindset is the one thing that actually can be transferred across. And so which mindset, while you were building the startup, do you think didn't serve you? And if you were to do it, I know you said at the start, if you were to do it again, you don't know how much you'd actually change, but if you're reflecting on your mindset, is there any evolution of your mindset approach if you were to do it again?
Yes, there are two elements when I look back at the startup journey. Is one, I had the mindset, but I didn't know how to name it, and I've only managed to name it when I did the exploration. Because when you have such fast success under so much spotlight, people do ask the question of how did you do that, and you don't know how to answer, because again, you were in this blur of intensity and intuition, and you didn't do anything by the book. So when they ask you, how did you do that? Your only answer that comes to mind is like, I don't fucking know. It just happened, So I actually tried to trace my steps back so I can give them a bit more structured answer, because I was feeling silly and I was feeling undeserving of their, looking up to me. So they're looking at me as the successful leader and founder, but I can't tell them what were the things I did right. So I tried to trace back. So I know that one of the winning things for me was having the I'm never going to fail mindset. And I now call it the what if you fly reframe. So rather than thinking what if you fall, always think about what if you fly. And I've done a lot of research about it, and I know that it's, backed by science, that it's the way your brain reacts to how you condition it. So if you are going to focus on the things that you are going to achieve, your brain will naturally push you towards solutions. But if you're going to keep focusing about the things you're scared of and how you're potentially going to fail, your brain is not going to help you to not fail. So I was doing that, but I couldn't name it. And, I banged on the doors that were not supposed to open. I went for investment to people that everyone else told me they're never going to invest. They only invest in above a certain level of revenue, or they invest only above certain level of scale. And I would still go. And I had multiple situations in which, I'd be told no over email, then over phone, and then I'd still confirm someone to come to breakfast with me. And I'd managed to secure the investment, and not just for the, let's say, 150,000 that I was seeking, but all of a sudden the guy offered to fill my whole round, because he saw in me that I had so much passion and drive, and that I was absolutely not going to give up at any point. And that impressed him enough to bend all his rules and change sort of the qualifying criteria for investment. So I think I had that mindset always. I was just not naming it right. So that's the one I look back with, okay, I did that right. I nailed it.
quick pause in this podcast to say that if you like it, if you're enjoying it, if you just, tickle your fancy a wee bit, then it would mean the world to me if you could share it with a friend, give us a like, comment, subscribe, rate us on the Apple Podcasts and Spotify places, and, just generally be kind because, it helps and stuff. And then we get bigger guests, and then you have a better time and everyone's happy. All right, thanks. Let's get back to the episode, shall we?
But when it comes to mindset that I wouldn't want to have the second time, and I would encourage people to pay attention to from the very early days, is leadership trait and judging yourself as a leader based on whether everyone around you likes you. So that was probably the toughest moment in my journey when I realized that not all my team likes me as a founder and CEO. I've watched all these movies of these companies growing from tiny startup in a garage to IPO or, huge revenues and all these team celebrations and this founder being put on this pedestal. Well, obviously not always. Sometimes we have the toxic founders as well. But generally, I had that idea of being loved throughout. I thought I was a great leader. Previously in my career, I always had 100% satisfaction with my teams. I got along with my teams. I was a difficult leader, a demanding leader, but I was liked and I was respected, and they followed my lead wherever I wanted to take them. And here, we grew very fast. I started as a solo founder. Then there was probably 4 of us in the first 4 months. Then that whole team became unsuitable. So we had to exchange them all, which was already something that I looked at as a failure, because I was like, why did I choose them in the first place if I can't keep them for the majority of the road? So I already felt guilty for having to replace my whole early team. And I already started to apply these, maybe I'm not cut out for that. If I can't choose the right people from the beginning, how am I going to build this company? And then we started growing even further. So we went to 12 in the first year, then we went to 40 in the second year, and then beyond that. And at no point I expected or accepted or realized that you can't please everyone in a bigger organization. That people that will start with you when you're the size of 4 are not necessarily the people that are going to want to be with you on the journey when you are the size of 40 or 50. That you're going to have to take decisions that serve the company, sometimes serve the investors, sometimes serve the customers, but don't always serve the team the same way. And I wanted to be team first, but it's not always possible. And this was very, very hard for me. And there was also, a decision where I had regrets over my commitment towards championing gender diversity in the company as hard as I did, because I did it from the beginning. I had a full female management. I went way out of my way to recruit female developers for the team, because I knew that if we start doing this early on, it's going to be so ingrained in the company. It's going to be much easier to grow with those same values and with that same gender ratios going forward. But what I didn't consider is how much mentorship, support, and championing on those, minority demographics is required from a company at that stage, and how much capacity is needed from me, probably from some other people. And we were failing at that. We built a very diverse company, and we had no one looking out for the safety of these diverse demographics. So that was hard, and that was something that I, for a long time, didn't want to admit, of saying I made a mistake. I wasn't at the size or at the stage of the company to be able to make this commitment. And now I'm left with this now, and I have to deal with it. We had, 11 different nationalities, different sex orientations, different sex identities, different religions, and people were not trained and not familiar with how to be respectful towards each other There was never any intentionality involved in people making silly jokes that would be taken badly by someone else, but it was happening. And I ended up being the police of that, on top of my responsibilities. And I ended up being the shoulder to cry on for the people that felt in some way disrespected or didn't feel that I've put enough effort into those respectful boundaries being in place. So what I'm trying to get at with this really long monologue is, when you're starting a business as a founder, you have to be comfortable with the fact that you are not going to be liked by everyone, and you can't take it personally at all times, as I did, because I'd cry. Every time someone quit on me in the first year and a half, I didn't see it as their willingness to just move on and do something else. I saw it as my personal failure. I saw it as I didn't create a workspace that they would want to stay loyal to. I didn't create strategy that they would believe in long enough. I didn't create an environment where they felt happy enough to stay. And I was taking it all in on myself. And that was probably the hardest part. That was probably what put me towards burnout the most, from all the levels of stress we had in the organization. And I mean, I was raising capital, I was doing marketing, we were selling shares, we were bringing new investors, we had legal issues, licensing processes. So there was a lot of stressful elements. It was the people's element that stressed me out the most, and it's the one that almost broke me.
It seems to be the common narrative of most founders, a thing that often ends up being the hardest and the most complex. And so then if you cast yourself now with your current wisdom and awareness back into Karolina, who is in the thick of it, dealing with all of these people issues, how does your internal narrative and story change?
I'd be ruthless these days. I wouldn't have so much empathy. I wouldn't have so much... I wouldn't take things personally like that, because at the end of the day, you're building a business and not everyone can be your priority. So and probably by saying that, I will cut the amount of people that will want to work with me in the future in half. But I'm not creating families in the company. We are a team, like a football team, like a basketball team. Everybody has their role. It's about collaboration. It's about respect. But we're not family. I don't own you, family treatment. I don't need to be your psychotherapist. I don't need to be your protector at all times. And we have a right to disagree and part ways. So if I was going to name it in pretty simple terms, I'd hire slower, which is something that I've heard before, fire faster. That's what people told me after the journey I should have done. And looking back, absolutely, I should have.
There's a route that I love to go down around like balancing empathy in a team, because I feel like it's such a tricky balance to strike. But before we go there, I would love to think about what you do expect from yourself as a leader in the team when it comes to the relationship you have with the team. Mm-hmm. Not everyone is going to like you, but the assumption that I have is that you still need to be respected.
Absolutely.
Is there any other relational quality that you hold to be necessary in the team?
Transparency. Transparency has always been the key value within my leadership style. And I've been very transparent with teams throughout my career, and in a startup especially. So up until the employee or team member number 47, I still interviewed every single person. And I alternated between being in the first interview or in the last interview, because I tried to see which one where my presence adds most value, whether I need to be the one that actually catches their interest early on, or whether I need to be at the end interview to just make sure that they've been told everything and they're going with open eyes into what we're going to do. And I think I was transparent from the beginning, but at the beginning, I wasn't exactly sure how things are going to play out. So I started with selling this dream of a startup, we're going to be fully remote. You can work from home at your own pace. It's not going to be a grind because we want people to work sustainable hours and we want them to have work-life balance and all this crap. But I genuinely believe that this is how my company is going to look like. And then at some point when I realized this isn't what it is, we don't have any work-life balance. We're all working extremely hard. Every single person in the company is wearing multiple hats, doing overtime. Obviously, we tried to compensate for this with, payment, holidays. Like it was always fair, but it was never easy. And I realized that there is no work-life balance in a startup for anyone. So I had to go in and change our whole values deck. I had to hold a meeting first with our existing team to tell them I was wrong. These are not our values anymore. Our values are hustle and hustle hard. So if you want to be part of this company, we have big dreams and I think we can take you amazing places. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to enjoy this ride and you're going to be exposed to events that not many companies can expose you to, but it's going to be hard work and you need to go into this with your eyes open. Because only with that transparency at the recruitment stage, we were able to manage people's expectations. Because before there was a disconnect, we would sell them one vision and then they would come in and it turned out that it was something completely different and not everybody was able to adjust, not everybody was willing to adjust. So transparency in selling the situation what it actually is was always very important to me. And it went to the point that, I did things that most founders would probably say it's a mistake because I would tell my team, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay you salaries in 2 months, which is a risky move because for some people, this can be such a red flag in a startup that there is even a possibility of that they'll walk already now. But I did it precisely for that reason, because that was a situation that was possible. We had the roller coaster of roller coasters. We had been close to a very bad event of the company through a number of external circumstances where the business could have died. And 12 months later, we were at the top of our journey doing due diligence for a sale, right? Within that time. But when we were in a bad place, I felt this obligation to tell people that in 2 months, so that they have time to decide. Are you willing to take the risk? Do you believe in me and the company enough that we can turn this around and pay you that salary in 2 months? So you're going to stick with us until then. But if you don't, it's your right not to believe. It's your right not to seek that volatility, to want to have safety and stability. I don't know your situation. Maybe you just had a baby. Maybe you're a single mom, single father, maybe you're paying off debts, mortgages. I didn't want to leave people in a situation where they find out 2 days before, oh, we're shutting down shop. We're not going to pay you. So I was always very open. And it did cost me some people, but it was, understood. And it was something I almost expected, that part of the people are not going to want to take that kind of risk. But it was within my alignment of being transparent and honest with them. I never hid things from the team. I never hid any positive or negative events from the team. So that was something I'm very proud of. And I think that was something that made me respect me, even when some of them didn't like me.
Are there any boundaries or limitations to that transparency and honesty?
There are, when there is, legally dictated confidentiality included. And this I also told them. I would literally have all hands meeting and say, there are things that I can't tell you about that are happening, which I'm involved with and are taking my time, which is why you're not seeing me around as much on daily stand-ups, but I can't tell you what they are. What I can tell you is that at the moment they don't have an impact on you. And the moment they'll have an impact, I'll communicate it one way or another, whether I'll give you the full details or not. Obviously, there are also difficult situations, especially when you have departing team members and tricky HR situations where there are various different narratives involved and different sides of the story. As a leader that cares so deeply for your team and you want them to look up to you and you want them to think of you as someone fair and someone with integrity, and sometimes you can't defend yourself because as a head of the company, you're bound by confidentiality, you're bound by processes, you're bound by, just ways of doing things in leadership, where you have to just swallow that pride and go, let them think what they want to think. You know what you've done, how you behaved, and that you've done the right thing. And if they choose not to trust that you did, and lean into different story or narrative they might hear elsewhere, so be it.
When I interviewed our mutual friend Bernard, he spoke about the point where his company Busu almost died, and it was all because of these internal narratives and politics, which led to a mass resignation of about 30 people within a 6-week period. And the lesson he took from that was to not let people work out their resignation period. And so eventually he just told people to leave their laptops, get out and just go so they could start from scratch. Because sometimes these narratives can be a poison that spreads through the company.
Absolutely.
How did you manage this in these circumstances when there were various narratives flying around? Is there ways that you could contain that poison?
So that's the part I didn't manage well. And that's what I'm still referring to as I should have fired people faster, because that was exactly the point. There were people who didn't align with the company vision, didn't align with my vision, and there was the level of poison that was spreading between the team. And I should have just, cut that short at some point. But instead, I was trying to apply quick solutions and try to destroy the poison or, eliminate it because I didn't want to lose any of these people. I didn't want to give them a fresh start. I wanted to keep them, I wanted to convince them. I wanted to prove them wrong. And then it did end with a couple of people leaving as a group, obviously smaller scale because we were not the size of Bernard's company. And it had a very big impact on me personally, because I was deeply attached emotionally to these people. They were there from the beginning, and I thought they were going to be there for the long haul. And I was really, really worried about the domino effect on the rest of the team. But it stopped there. It was a couple of, domino, whatever you call them, plaques fell, and then it stopped. And I was almost shocked that it didn't go any further. And that's the main lesson I took for future, that it doesn't need to go all the way. You don't need to lose your whole team. There are people who are going to stand against these narratives and the spreading poison. So just sometimes cut the losses faster and move on.
And that's where this element of more ruthlessness comes in.
Yeah.
But I still feel like there's such a strong and necessary place for empathy and emotional connection and attachment in a company.
Yeah.
Where do you define where those two things are necessary? Obviously, the ruthlessness with firing fast, and that would have stopped the poison sooner. But where do you still think that incorporating empathy into various parts of the process are necessary?
I think it's a tricky question because it is one that it's difficult to set a clear boundary of, how much of an open door policy do you want to have? How many levels down are you going to have people come and talk to you directly about their problems? Because obviously when you're building the company from such a small team to bigger and bigger, you become less and less available. And therefore, your empathy becomes less and less because you don't have the details and the full picture of everybody's problems. And they sometimes still expect for you to have that full picture, but it just becomes, their problems stay the same, and it's your capacity that becomes smaller and smaller because you have more and more things on your plate. So I don't really know how to answer this question. I definitely think there is need for empathy, and I'm an empathetic person, so that would also play a part in my leadership. But I am not even willing to find out anytime soon, because that journey of the difficulty with managing bigger teams in a startup alongside with everything else probably means that I wouldn't want to run a startup anytime soon, or I would delegate people's management completely from the beginning. And not because I'm not a good leader, just because I have PTSD from my last experience and I don't want to go through that again. I don't find pleasure or fulfillment in that type of leadership, which I'm only ready to admit now. Is this going to make me a weaker founder when I go and seek investment and say from the beginning, I want to have a chief staff officer, from day one, or I don't want anyone reporting to me a part of my top management from day one? Maybe, but at the same time, maybe the transparency of the ability to recognize what drains your energy versus what raises your energy is something more people should analyze and be open about when they start businesses, because then at least, again, your upward expectations are managed and your expectations of yourself are managed, and you're avoiding some common pitfalls that you've done on your first journey.
I actually love this because it reminds me of something that a man who has inspired us both said so much at Branson. He said that entrepreneurs are not managers. Entrepreneurs are people that have ideas, that inspire people, but they're not the people who are there making sure that people are hitting their quarterly targets and whatnot. And therefore, the answer in your mind is you'd have a chief of staff from day one. You would say, no one's reporting into me apart from the leadership team. Are there any other elements of the people side that you still feel drawn to, or would you want to delegate pretty much every aspect of it?
No, I don't think that anyone can sell the vision other than a founder, And I've seen it multiple times where people would interview with us and they would decline the job opportunity. Obviously, the industry that I worked in is not fully accepted by everyone. Some people have ethical concerns, and that I actually never tried to overcome, because that's just your own judgment, whether you want to or not. It's not my place to try to convince you in any way. But a lot of people had fear of startups, and that I did try to overcome in them with full transparency of, yes, there will be some challenges of working in a startup, but there also will be, it will be a great adventure too, for reasons X, Y, Z. And unless it was me trying to address those concerns, it wasn't working. So quite often I would call people after they declined the job opportunity, and then we'd end up landing them, because as a founder, I think you are the most authentic in sharing your vision. I think it comes through the most convincing way. I loved team events. I loved spending time with my team. I loved celebrations together. So I wouldn't want to be invisible. And when I say ruthless, it's just to those situations where things are really impacting the business. I would be ruthless then, but I would never be a founder that the team has no access to, or is on some kind of high horse and only deals with investors and customers, but not really with their team. I can't be that. I will always be close to the team. It's just more about the HR policies and processes and clear boundaries that I would want someone to set them for me, rather than me having to deal with every single problem and every single personal issue of people working for us.
Something this reminds me of is around control. And it feels like the people side of things we almost have the least control of in the business. They're the most unpredictable, potentially chaotic, the most complex. And in my founding business building experience, I've recognized the amount that I love control and I love clarity, which is challenging when it comes to building a business because there's often little control and complete uncertainty in most areas. So how have you recognized, or how has your relationship with control evolved?
I'm an absolute control freak, always have been. And I think the startup journey actually forced me to evolve that relationship, which I wouldn't have done otherwise. Because as you grow, you learn that you have to start delegating and you have to start trusting the team more. For me, it hasn't happened pre-acquisition because the stakes were too high. So up until we were bought, I was controlling everything. I was first line support on incidents, being woken up by, pager duty pings in the middle of the night because I didn't trust that people responsible for this would wake up. And I felt too much of an obligation towards the customers that I wanted to make sure that someone is up and attending. So, you normally have DevOps on call, and we obviously had these teams, but I'd be on call with them. And I'd be on every single Slack channel, pinging, saying, is anybody on it? Has anybody responded? Has the ticket been raised? To that extent. So when I'm telling you this kind of detail, obviously everything else, marketing, sales, commercial, I signed off every deck. I signed off every contract. I signed off every prioritization of the sales roadmap. The only person I trusted almost unconditionally from early days was my COO, but that's probably because we worked together in a number of different jobs before, and she's earned that trust already. And I knew that we worked together very, very well, and I knew that we have a very similar way of commercial thinking. And I also knew that I have no choice but to trust someone if I want to not trust so many other people, But it had nothing to do with their competences. It was very much to do with my relationship with control and thinking that at the end of the day, I was the one that acquired the external investment, and they're not going to care for my blame pointing if something goes wrong. They're going to blame me. I'm the one that made the commitment for things to work flawlessly, and I need to make sure that they will. So, and it was hard because as we were growing, I wasn't evolving the relationship with control fast enough. But when we got bought, we got so much support to some extent that I started to feel more comfortable of letting go of certain areas. The stakes got lower, obviously, to some extent because we were no longer serving multiple customers in the B2B space, and we were focusing on one specific brand. So it was a little bit easier on zoom in focus, and it was easier for the people below me to apply their competences towards that, which made me believe that they can do it. And as we went along, I started to see that they could have done it all along. It's just that I wasn't there yet with my confidence in them. So that's also a lesson for me in the future, to trust people faster. I always say that trust is not given but earned, but maybe it doesn't have to be earned over such a long period of time that it puts you in an unsustainable operating mode yourself because you're controlling things so hard.
The thing that comes to mind is that your level of transparency sounds like it's in the name of building trust.
Mm-hmm. It is. Absolutely.
And so then you approach how you build in terms of building trust with your team.
Yeah.
But then them earning your trust feels like it's either it's just a very high standard that you hold yourself to, and then you hold your team to exactly the same standard, or it seems higher for the team to gain your trust in a way.
I think it's just a high standard of my expectations for people. But to some extent it's good, because we're all new to this, and the stakes are always going to be higher for me because it's my whole. For some of them, even though they are part of the startup, they are bought into the vision, it's still a job. For a founder, it's your livelihood, So you're always going to have more at stake, sharper focus, more attention to detail because it's your baby, it's your everything, So and I believe that this is the main reason why it took me time to trust people, because we also were not one of those Silicon Valley organizations where everybody had huge shares and everybody was equally bought into the business. We had different circumstances. We took big investments. At the beginning, there was quite a bit of dilution. So actually the team equity in the business wasn't at the levels you see in the movies where people walk away millionaires, after a transaction. So I just knew that I'm the one with the most at stake, and naturally I'm going to care the most and notice the most things. So while this was hard on an execution level, I don't regret this at all because I did put out a lot of fires because of that attention to detail. I saved the business multiple times because of that attention to detail. And I think ultimately, the final destination we reached with the sale and the way the company integrated and grew after the sale was also due to my high standards and attention to detail. And despite being slightly flawed on the leadership style, still a lot to do with my leadership style. Because even when I say earlier in the journey, I had a lot of insecurities about my leadership because not everybody liked me and so on, I did have almost 100% retention of the team post-acquisition, which is a very rare situation in a startup going and integrating into a big enterprise. So there must have been something that people did like or respect about me so that they stayed on the journey.
I'm sure there are countless things that people respected about you. Another point on control I heard you speak about before, that you were this productivity wizard and guru, and you did all the hacks and you had all the techniques and your email inbox zero and everything was tagged and labeled. And then you hit this transition point where you embraced the chaos.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that mindset shift from, which feels like a more controlling, rigid, by the book, structured way of thinking, to a more chaotic and sort of going with the flow of the chaos way of thinking?
I think it was a dual track because I turned into what I call a chaos Muppet. Is an actual phrase in, I can't exactly recall the author of the methodology, but I didn't know that there was such phrase, that some people are, you're either inbox zero, super structured, or you could be thriving in chaos. And I always saw myself under the first sort of label. And it was not a conscious decision. It was an enforced action from me because at some point I ran out of time in the day to be able to be structured. The workload was just so heavy that I didn't have time to download attachments from the emails and put them in the right folders, and forget inbox zero or, my meticulously planned and color-coded Monday.com boards. I mean, when we started out, my level of control was so high that I not only managed my own task board in Monday.com, which was already, I could probably become a Monday.com product manager with the amount of different integrations, automations, and features that I developed for them. I was on the call with the team weekly asking for new type of feature to support my complex controlling mechanisms. But it was to the point that I had also people's boards and task streams feeding into my own. So I had the full visibility into 10 people large team at all times. And I required that same level of organization from them. So I wanted everything color-coded by the end of the week. I wanted everything updated with delivery dates. So I never enforced a deadline on people, but I enforced transparency about the progress towards the deadline. So if you couldn't do something by Friday, that's fine. But by Friday, I need to know why you couldn't do it and when you're going to do this. Because otherwise I felt outside of my comfort zone. And I didn't have enough appreciation for the fact that some of those people could have been chaos Muppets and perform better in a less controlled environment, because I just didn't know how to deal with that, because I never tried that approach myself. And then at the time where the workload just became this behemoth of things, I stopped doing Inbox Zero. I stopped planning this huge, 2 weeks cycles of work. I just started to do as much as I could fit in the day, and I turned into trying to achieve 3 things every day, 3 things that actually move the needle. So I turned back to paper and pen, which I haven't done in years. And all of a sudden in the morning, I would just start my day with writing the top 3 priorities that for some reason, need to be the priorities. And then I added another element of that, which put me in the right frame of mind, which was writing something that I've achieved the day before. Because I found that when I recognized the achievement from the day before, whether that was small or big, it made me more confident that I can do the same today. I can move a needle by just that little bit, by the 1% that day. And it stuck. To this day, my inbox consists of 17,000 emails, and I don't delete, I don't archive, I don't categorize, I don't label. I just leave them all there. And it's been like this for good 2.5 years now. And I'm yet to find an email I missed because of not having a system in place. I just think that in the current age where you're so connected to your mobile phone and the emails keep coming and you kind of keep on scrolling them when you're in the elevator, on the tube, or any free moment that you have, obviously when you're very heavily involved founder in operations, you're not missing things. And that time spent on organization of your work sometimes can be spent better at actually doing the work. And when you don't have the privilege of choosing between, you always have to choose the action over the plan to act. So I will probably never go back to such highly structured and process-oriented workflow, because I find myself functioning way more relaxed in this chaos of emails, tasks floating around. And I think it also stimulates your brain to be more active in identifying the things that you really need to focus on. Because when you become over-dependent on systems and to-do lists and various sort of boards that are telling you what your priorities are, you lean too much towards that and sometimes don't trust your instincts. And if you don't do that, you're more in a flight or fight type of mode. And naturally, your instinct leads you towards the things that you really need to do. That's what I find, at least. And I prefer that way of working at the moment. And I prefer going to bed thinking, I'll just figure this out tomorrow, rather than in the middle of reorganizing my to-do list, because I realized that I started doing this. I'm still nowhere close to finishing, and it's 3:00 in the morning, and I'm going to bed anxious, not just about the work that I need to do the next day, but the lack of organization of that work. So at least I cut out one anxiety trigger from it, the one that I could cut out, because I can't cut the amount of work, but I can cut the stress about having this work ultra organized.
The attitude towards like your expectations when it comes to the work. Yeah. And the main thing is keep the main thing the main thing. And that feels like a muscle that's just built through
Exactly.
becoming aware of it.
Exactly.
What I'm sensing here is the way that you evolved went from this place of stress much more to a place of calm.
Yeah.
And various things happened that allowed you to embrace this calmness, which in my mind is inducive of making the best decisions.
Yeah.
Which is ultimately what a CEO and leader has to do. You're paid to make the best decisions possible on behalf of the company.
Yeah.
What other habits did you build during the company or even after the company that have led to a more calmer state of being?
Here I'm going to refer to habits that are a little bit maybe outside of the workplace and more in the space of holistic living, because I think that I didn't have enough appreciation of how much that matters in the journey of entrepreneurship. And I spoke about it several times that I think I didn't have enough time to explore life hacks that would help me be more effective at my work. And I've always been focused on healthy living, healthy diet. I've gone through a number of personal health struggles, which sort of opened me up to quite a deep nutritional knowledge, and holistic medicine and functional living type of knowledge. But it felt in a startup, I forgot all about that because I became the least priority all of a sudden. I put myself on the bottom of the priority ladder, which probably I shouldn't have, because at the end of the day, as a company founder, you're the company biggest asset. And so is your health, and so is your mental state. But I didn't see it as such. I only saw my productivity and my ability to act as the asset, and everything else was less of a priority. And I only revisited that knowledge and started to implement these practices after I sold the business and my workload eased. And as an example, I can tell you, I went back to low carb, ketogenic diet. And
why?
Because I remembered that this diet has major impact on your energy levels, especially with someone that has issues with insulin resistance, which means that I crash after any amount of sugar. My insulin spikes, and I couldn't understand why I was so sleepy at 3 p.m. This 3 p.m. Moment where everybody wants a coffee and something sweet because their eyes are closing in a meeting. I haven't had that in 3 years because I eat high protein diet. I don't touch sugar at all. I don't drink fizzy drinks or sweet drinks. I don't eat things like oats or croissants for breakfast. My breakfast consists of bacon, eggs, and avocado day after day, heavy on proteins. And I can see that this gives me sustainable release of energy throughout the day. And I think if I remembered about that during the startup journey, it would have been easier rather than feeding myself with short bursts of energy through a bar of chocolate, combined with a glass of red wine for ease of stress. That wasn't the best choice of things that feed my body and feed my energy levels. So that was a major change that I did. Now that also resulted in almost, 20 kilograms weight loss for me, because I started to prioritize my body, my well-being, including my body confidence. Because when I was in a startup, it's probably hard for women to admit, but I had major insecurities about being overweight and not going to the gym, and not living the lifestyle of, Travis from Uber. You see this powerful, fit, running CEOs in the US running their startups, and you're looking at yourself thinking you're some sort of failure because you're not caring about that part of your life. But then again, as I said, I've arrived at the conclusion that there is no work-life balance in the startup, and I saw that health element as life, which I didn't have time for. And I also say that if there is any balance, there is a work-mom balance, because anytime that you have left outside of work, you invest into your child, and there's very little time left for you. So I made it a priority to get back to healthy living. I started doing sports again, and I started going for walks, because it was quite hard to go from a place where you haven't exercised for years, and you sort of conditioned yourself to think that time spent exercising is time spent on things that don't matter because you should be working in that time, equals waste of time. to all of a sudden, committing yourself to gym 3 times a week and tennis like I do now. So I started slow. I started walking. I actually started walking on Necker Island on my last day on the first retreat. I did a hike around the island before we left, and it just sort of gave me such peace of calm and such induction of endorphins that I started doing this when I came back. And it went to the point that I now, if I don't go for a 10,000 steps or 10 kilometers walk at least 3-4 times a week in the morning, I feel it. I miss it. It's my time of nervous regulation. It's my time of setting priorities. It's not always a meditative state. I talked to you a little bit before that sometimes I just need to regulate. So I put very, very loud music on and I'll walk for an hour and a half at high pace. And it's my way of putting myself in a place of calm. But sometimes if I'm really busy, I'll work on those walks. I'll, go through emails. I'll send voice notes. I'll take calls. I'll network. I'll do some of my social media, which now is part of my sort of daily task list as well, as I'm building the personal brand associated with the book. So it's time well spent, but I no longer deprioritize me. And I would love to say that I would maintain that element if I ever went into the same intensity of running a startup or, being in a leadership position in a fast-growing business. But it's easy to say in the place that I'm in now. If that actually would become reality, I don't know. I would love for the commitment to stick. But I'm worried that it wouldn't, because it was very, very difficult to find time for this previously.
What would you sacrifice such that some of the healthy habits would stick? Because it's at the end of the day, it's time. And at the moment you're working 7, 8, 9, 10 hour days, more manageable. 14, 15 hour days, a lot less manageable. What would you sacrifice if you were to still prioritize your health as number one?
I don't think I would sacrifice the walks, because I think walking is one of the healthiest and best cardiovascular movements, and you can still do work while you're that. So it's kind of a combination of both, right? So you don't need to give up on anything. But I can't say that I wouldn't sacrifice the gym or the sports. Again, it depends on what your end goal is. If you're going to the business that you know that you're going to run for the next 10, 15 years, I'd probably find something within the work environment that I'll delegate further so that I can maintain those healthy habits. If I was going into a startup to take it through transformation and really fast and intense exercise, or, if I was going to help to sell it, or those kind of more short-term oriented goals where all your time and energy is required almost immediately, I'd probably commit myself to this fully. Again, I don't say that this is the right approach, but I just know that this would probably be my approach. I'm sort of conditioned to give all to business when I'm deeply committed. So it would be unrealistic of me to think that all of a sudden I'll find a way to balance. I thought I will balance this in the startup because I ran my own consultancy before. My startup wasn't the very first company that I ran on my own. And in a consultancy, I worked many hours, and I was convinced that you cannot work harder than that, and that I'll be able to maintain that balance then. And it was the startup where the nature of business was different, where there were people responsibilities, where there were product responsibilities, where there were investment raising responsibilities, stakeholder management responsibilities, marketing, PR, all this. And there was just no time. So I'm not even on a guilt trip over that time. I don't think it was right for me, but I still think I had no choice. And I'm still happy with the outcome at the end of the day. So I have no resentfulness towards myself, and I have no regrets.
Amazing. As you shouldn't.
No.
Because how useful is that to us? At the end of the day, we're doing the best we can, given the information that we have and the demands and our priorities. And Yeah. It's
In general, I feel like resenting yourself and regrets is something that shouldn't have place in life. We live in the present, right? And if anything, look towards the future, just not too far out either. But I think the easiest way to live your life is to focus on what's right in front of you right now.
easier said than done.
True.
I would love to go on a bit of a tangential direction and ask about what you learnt from psychedelics about yourself. Quick pause in this interview to say we've got a newsletter. It's beautiful. And if you like summaries of the interviews, you like mental models, and generally very succinct, high quality stuff in your inbox, then subscribe. Links are in the description. Right, let's get back to Karolina. I heard you went on a very intense trip. I'm not sure if it was ayahuasca or if you described it as bufo, which I wasn't sure.
So bufo is it's the psychedelic called 5-MeO DMT. It's a little bit different to Aya because it's a short and intense type of journey. I think it's the strongest psychedelic known to man as it stands. But ayahuasca was unimaginable for me because those hours and those prolonged sessions of the loss of control for someone like me was just too scary. Here, at least I knew that this was going to be intense, but it's going to be shorter. What did I learn? What did I not learn? I think this is such a eye-opening exercise. And I have to admit that at the beginning I was skeptical because, it is a trend right now within entrepreneurs and founders to go on these self-exploration journeys and dig deep into their personalities and traumas and past and potentially, future. So I didn't really believe in the magic power of it and in the life-changing potential. But I think it did show me things that I wasn't aware of before. Everything that we talked about, from changing the perception of my upbringing, from resentment towards gratefulness, this was very much something I realized with those journeys. It showed me a different way to look at those things, that certain benefits comes at certain costs, and you need to be able to recognize that. And I think the ability to believe in yourself and ability to reframe from self-doubt to self-belief was anchored in that. Because when I came back from that, and I think sometimes it needs to be reinforced, so you have to repeat the exercise a couple of times for this to really stick. If you have a really strong personality and a strong sense of yourself, it tends to change you at the beginning and then slightly fade, which I think has happened to me a little bit. But when I first came back, I felt unstoppable and things felt limitless for me. And I've never felt that in my life. This is when I realized that I had that subconscious mindset during my startup, but I couldn't name it. This is the moment where I could name it very clearly.
This is the what if I fly?
Yeah, absolutely. And I started to really think completely differently. And the book is the best example. At no point when I started to write the book, I considered that I might not finish it, that I might not have it in the final state for the island, that it might not be amazing, that the book will not have a good reception. And I'm still in the space of, I have zero doubts that it will be a bestseller. I have zero doubts that I will get it to places where I want it to be. And so far, that belief is translating into things happening exactly that way. So I have no reason to think that that switch that happened to me during the Bufo journey was anything harmful other than just opening me up to sky's the limit type of thinking,
It's quite an intense way of achieving that outcome.
Yeah.
And
I'm all about intense. We talked about
so am I.
it.
But at the same time, you can't do booth every weekend, right?
No.
So what are the habits that complement that sort of awakening experience?
Reframing. I do reframing daily. When I wake up with a sense of doubt about something, I don't let it linger. I literally put in dedicated time during the day to sit there and try to understand where the sense of doubt is coming from, trying to rationalize with it at first and reframe the situation so that it puts me in the place of self-belief at the end of that moment. I did that before your podcast today. I told you about it when I came in, so that I can come in here feeling I totally belong on the same podcast that all your amazing, accomplished previous guests. I have something interesting to say. I have an interesting way of sharing the story and people will enjoy it, rather than letting the feeling of, what if I'm not big enough? What if my industry was too niche? What if my success wasn't remarkable enough? Letting it seep into the way I tell the story today. So this is the main habit, reframing. And I practice this even with some of my founders I mentor. I either call them when I'm in the process of reframing myself so that they can see that someone that they look up to and they consider a mentor is also going through those moments. I've done it a couple of times. Even with our common friend Yash, I called her literally 5 minutes after I received a rejection from the publisher that I really wanted to get, where I was in the space of, well, no one will publish this book now, and I wanted that one, and it didn't happen. What am I going to do now? And I talked her through my process of thinking to reach the point where that rejection was fuel for me to cancel my meetings that day, get back home, and hammer out all the other publishers that I had on my list quicker and faster than I would have done, because I just knew that rejection told me something, and it was just feedback that I should focus my attention somewhere else rather than sitting and dwelling on the fact that I've been rejected. So reframing is a really important habit for me, and just maybe not going too much in the future either. I like to set short-term goals. I think it's easier to achieve short-term goals than these really massive, complex things. So I currently don't plan my to-do list anywhere further than 1 week from now. I have the one day maybe where I dump everything else. And then at the beginning of each week, I'll look at that, pick up the 3 things for each day and just have the rest sort of loosely hanging in there. And then also, again, not to overuse the word reframe, but redefining success definition. Because sometimes you set out to achieve a goal and you'll achieve 30% of it and you consider this a failure. And I've learned to pivot or adapt along the way so that when I already see that I'm not going to reach the 100%, I redefine what I thought is the success metric for that, so that at the end of the day, the 30% can also feel like something I can write down in my journal the next day as an achievement, as a success. And it puts me in the right frame of mind to carry on.
So powerful. I'm feeling very confronted by lots of things that you just said. So I love this. It's incredibly helpful, specifically with what does success mean with regards to the podcast. And it's been a journey of intense reframing of self-criticism and doubt into recognizing the beautiful elements of the past 18 months.
I'll give you this in practice. And I could do this with a startup, but I want to talk about the book because the book is it's a startup to some extent on its own, right? Which I didn't realize at the beginning. It involves a team, it involves tasks, timelines, different goal sets. And when I self-published the book, which was driven by timeline, by my lack of experience with the market, I didn't know that it takes, 2 years for the publisher to get the book out. I didn't know that trying to secure a publisher is almost like securing an investment for the startup. So I didn't consider this timeline. So I announced on LinkedIn when I started writing the book that the book will be out in June. Completely impossible when you take a traditional publishing route in place. And then I published the book myself in less than a month, working with a team of 4 people on layout, proofreading, cover shoot, copy edit, all the different elements that are involved in the book, they were working in parallel, where usually this is a sequence of events where one finishes their part, the other one takes over. We were working in parallel, completely out of sequence. They were getting chapters not in order. And I told them at the beginning, this is going to be an absolute grind. I'm going to pay you double. I'm going to compensate your time, but you need to turn around fast and it needs to be this chaos because I need to finish this on time. And they all came on board with that. So they couldn't really, blame me for the process or the lack of it. But when I self-published the book at the beginning, I didn't see it as a success. I thought it was a failure to secure a traditional publisher fast enough. And it took me a while to realize, what are you talking about? You have single-handedly gone through the process where most writers don't even attempt that process because they don't know where to start. You not only executed this process, but you've educated yourself about what this process involves. And you ended up with a physical, high-quality, professionally self-published book that people pay attention to, that stands out. And Richard himself told me this is an absolute beautiful product. And I can't see anything that would scream self-published in it in any shape or form. So I started to see it as a success and almost even a riskier and more bold bet than going the way of having someone do this all for you and take all the creative decisions for you and, taking majority of this work away from you. So this was an example where I reframed. So now I feel like this was major success, and actually getting a publisher is a secondary success to that. And obviously that's means to an end because I want the book widely distributed. So I need a publishing house to help me with that. But I no longer see the book as anything worse off because the first gifting edition was self-published, and it also allowed me to get the book into the hands of probably almost 450 people now who continue to send me feedback and continue to feed that confidence in me that this is a really good read and that it's empowering and that it's paying it forward and that it's doing something impactful for people who might not have gone through the same journey as I have yet or will never go through it and might want to read about someone else's learnings and takeaways so that they can find inspiration in it.
Wow. I love that story. And what a sort of mark of external approval that Richard himself, who's published 4, 5, 6 books, and as the entrepreneur that he is, gives that amazing feedback. I'm sure that I can.
This is
feel
another intuition anchor as well, because I did research about covers when I was designing my cover, and every research that I've done, and I've used both external agency and ChatGPT, deep research, and generally spent quite a bit of time. All the trends were exactly against of what I wanted to do, because I knew from the beginning that this is a book about me and I want myself on the cover, however vain that might sound. That was just my goal. I wanted to be on the cover of my book. And all the data that I was finding was, no, that is not the trend right now. Typography is a trend. Not only that, but especially in business and entrepreneurships, women on covers don't sell because men get alienated from those books. Red on red doesn't work. It's too bold, And then if you think about the cover that I did, it's quite complex to print as well. It raises the cost and whatever. So I've gone against all advice that I found or that I've been given around this cover. And yet when the final product is landing in the hands of agents or publishers, they might have some concerns about the length of the book because it's 650 pages long, so not your usual buy at the bookstore. But every single person says this is one of the most powerful covers we've seen because it tells such a strong story with one single glance, and it stands out so much and it draws us in. We are curious about what the book is about because of its cover. So this is where your deep internal rooted intuition shows you that you should sometimes just go with your gut. And of course, I'm only going to be able to fully validate my intuition when this book sells in stores, as I think it will. But at the moment, it just shows me that I was right, listening to my heart, to my soul on this, rather than ChatGPT.
And that brings us to the tattoo you have, illegitimi non carborundum, which means?
Don't let the bastards grind you down.
There you go. The place I'd love to close is with this idea of luck. It's something that you talk about in the book, and it's something that people accredit various levels of success to, which I think you and I align in that I don't believe in luck, and it feels like you've engineered the serendipity in your life.
Yeah.
So could you give us a high level of your perspective on luck?
Yes, and I can tie it in again a little bit to the Buffo journey, because it's the same situation as with sort of the belief in yourself. I always had that approach, but I couldn't name it. And only in the recent months, I've learned how to articulate what I feel about it. So I thought that feeling lucky is on the same level as feeling unworthy. So I associated something that I think happened to me by luck with imposter syndrome of I wasn't good enough for this to happen to me without the luck. And I removed both of these beliefs or phrases from my life and my dictionary. I don't think that imposter syndrome exists in any shape or form. I think when you feel that you're not good enough, it's a good feeling because it means you're growing, and it should be your internal sign that you're going the right direction because you keep developing yourself and you're going to get new skills, new possibilities, and so on. And when you feel lucky, you should feel accomplished, and you should count that as success, because I've learned through a number of situations in my life that luck just doesn't come by chance, despite what the definition of it says. You know, you need to be playing the game in the first place to get lucky in it. And I could bring a number of stories in which a sequence of events led me to a situation in which externally someone could portray that as she got lucky. But if I didn't put action, hustle, risk, pivots in place along that journey, I wouldn't ended up in a position where this luck could land. And I look at that the whole time. I don't believe in coincidences. When people mention to me something like, oh, it's such a coincidence we met here, I was like, that is not coincidence. That is synchronicity that we met here. And it's not only synchronicity of our meeting, but it's also synchronicity of events that led me here, that happened before. And it's the action taken to show up at those events. There's the action taken at send that random message or that email or put yourself in the right room where you could meet the right people who will then, allow synchronicity of other events happen to you. Is essentially all combining into your own doing and your own worthiness of whatever happens to you. It's not luck. It's you work for this. You made this luck land.
And you have worked for it, and you have done incredible things, and it has shown. And the book is coming out very soon. And so where can people find it? When does it come out? Can you share anything that we can support you with, given that you've been so generous with your time? And
I really appreciate it. So the book will be likely out in the stores and through the commercial route late spring, early summer, because we're now working on a little bit of a developmental edit to make it slightly smaller. However, if you want to sign up for the waitlist, HerPlay.com, quite easy link to remember. And I will be doing a private limited sale of the book on my social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Stories by Pelc, soon. And this is your only chance to get the book in its full version with full juicy details and my original sort of truth as it was gifted to Richard and a number of people in my close circle, because the next book after will be a slightly different version. It will feature some bonus chapters, but it will likely be much, much shorter. And I do think that the book in its current version is the best version of it. So I recommend. Follow me. You'll get all the updates, and I'll be announcing the sale quite soon.
Incredible. Wow, what a journey. Thank you so much. That's been amazing.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I love being on this podcast.